Hey everyone, welcome to the Stelios podcast. This is episode 122. I'm your host Stelios and the founder and director of Stelios Pure Food Innovation, and today's guest is Mark Hayward from the Dingley Dell Pork company. Although it's just Dingley Dell Pork, I just added all the rest. Technically, this is our first recording of the year. There's been so much happening that I just thought a creative break would do me some good. The start of this year, we've already seen inflation and sourcing issues, so we really wanted to just focus on getting all the ingredients we needed for all the products you need. Also, if you consider our guests generally are in a similar business, they are all having the same issues too, so I don't want to stress them out with podcasting dates. So, really, it was pretty much keep a head down and crack on, if you get me. Hopefully, this won't be a long update. But towards the end of this, you will hear about a meaty competition. Sorry, I couldn't help myself, given the guest. If you are on our mailing list, you'll know that we are in the process of creating a new fulfillment centre for Ceres to create, for when we get orders, to sort of go through them more efficiently. So my brain power has been totally used up by racking and square footage, cubic heights, and just everything. So hopefully that'll be done in a month or two, but it just will be just taking a load out of us until then. So everyone at Ceres is really just sort of plugging away in the background. So there have been lots of updates or new products to our online store. You will now find a host of new labelling solutions. We have seen how customers are using the I Love Fish and Chip labels to seal the bags and stick on customer receipts. The Fried to Perfection labels are used on individual chip packaging for sealing, but also to seal the bags on the sides where the paper bag is folded over somewhat, quite similar to what McDonald's do essentially. It stops people getting their fingers in there and getting to the food, I would imagine. New to the lineup is the advanced food rotation labels. These are made completely of paper. They've got a different adhesive on the back to our other labels, so it's a little bit lighter, let's say, and shouldn't leave goo on all your surfaces. And with so many of you now serving up so many different species of fish, we've created some little labels that are really nifty. They just simply have the name of the fish species. It could be cod, haddock, huss. So the idea is that if a customer comes in and has a haddock and chips and a cod and chips, quick label, off you go. What it actually saves is, it's a simple, cheap and effective method really. Why run around trying to find some old pen that's gone all dry and then you break through the packaging with it? It just looks tacky. So all our label solutions are plastic free. They're all in stock and usually with you next day. Today's guest is the brilliant Mark Hayward from Dingley Dell Pork. Mark and his brother Paul are third generation family farmers with a deep love and respect for the countryside and agriculture. They started the Dingley Dell Pork brand around 15 years ago with the philosophy of animal welfare, taste, sustainability, and these remain pillars and foundations of what they do today. Their red Duroc breeding program for high marbling, they scan the animals, they look after them. I went round the farms, I was well impressed, and it was just great going out with Mark and seeing the pheasants walking around the fields, and I had to get my wellies on too. Well, Mark's spare wellies. It was just great. When you see the effort these guys go to, it's just really impressive. Overall, I was impressed with what Mark and Paul are doing. As you'll hear, they aren't just farmers growing food, but they're committed to farming in harmony with nature and improving the number and variety of species living around the farm each year. By doing this, they've managed to build up bee numbers, and they're now feeding over 1 million bees on their farm. I was impressed about, the very simple way that they count the bees. It's not one person walking around counting bees. But, they care about the ecology. And Mark really believes that if every company did one little thing to help the environment around them, it would just magnify a lot of progress. Anyway, if you want to purchase some Dingley Dell Pork or Dingley Dell cured meats, or you just want to follow them, then the links are in the show notes. These products are top class. For the first 3 people to message me about the podcast or Dingley Dell Pork, I will personally order and send an introductory tasting back from Dingley Dell Pork. It's a win-win, you see, because they get paid and you get fed, and I like the idea of that. Anyway, on to the podcast with Mark Hayward. I hope you enjoy. Don't forget to message me if you want first dibs on that prize. Have a great one. Mark, welcome to the Ceres podcast.
Thank you very much. Nice to be here.
No, I'm really glad to be here. Thank you for having me in your lovely home. And we've got a beautiful view here. Well, not you, I mean the garden.
Thanks for clarifying that one.
Well, you know me. I've got, just started.
Wish I could say the same, Stelios, but I'm looking at you, mate.
No, so for those that don't know you, you're a part of the duo. So you and your brother of Dingley Dell Pork. Is that
That's
right?
correct.
Yeah.
Yep.
And farmers for how many years would you say?
Well, both of us are mid-50s, so we've been farming, personally, both of us, for 30 years, if you like. I use the term loosely professionally, but we grew up doing a bit of farming, and we're third-generation farmers.
So with farming, is it something you just learn from people before you, or is there a course you take, or is it a bit of both?
Yeah, good question. I guess what happens if you're part of a family farm, which we were, so our father was a farmer, you grow up and that whole life is around you the whole time. So harvest time, for example, forget the livestock for a minute, your father's working all hours. If the weather's good, it's go, go, go on a combine. So, you might go up and hop on a combine at 9 o'clock at night or something. So you're kind of, over your formative years, you are really exposed to it. If something's, when I was a kid and Paul was, my dad had cattle, so we saw cattle being born, we saw pigs being born, so you've got it going on around you. So it's probably, if you're born into it, then you probably have a really great awareness of it come school leaving age, if you like. Whereas I'm guessing if you have no background in it, you've got quite a steep learning curve just to understand about it.
Well, I guess you start quite young, don't you? Like, even informally.
I think we were groomed, to be honest, when I look back, Stelios.
Yeah, and for your dad, I guess it was pretty much a result having two boys, because for farmers, you know what I mean.
Knowing what it's like for labour now, I reckon he definitely thought that was a result.
Although girl farmers, lady farmers, they get well stuck in. They're not afraid of hard work, but just the fact that he probably thought of it back then as pretty much an advantage.
He probably thought, right, that's good.
Yeah. So I think I often ponder how different it must be for you guys. Although farming is inherently hard, but do you often ponder how hard it must have been for the first generation, like your granddad, 80 years ago, 90 years ago, 100 years ago?
Yeah, it's interesting because you can look back historically at it, and I'll give you a great example. I've seen accounts from my grandparents' time, so we would be talking possibly pre-Second World War, or it might be just post-Second World War, I forget. But for instance, and this is the easiest way for us to relate stuff, a cull sow, so a female breeding animal that goes for slaughter when it's finished doing its time as a breeding animal, that would pay the wages for 10 or 12 people. Now, it would be worth 20 quid.
It's like a rounding error.
Yeah. And that puts it into perspective, and I think it shows you how you can look back and you can see periods when, farming was very profitable and I guess very different. Probably wasn't very mechanized, I suppose. And again, particularly if you look back to that generation, a lot of people didn't have cars. So I'm guessing if you lived in the countryside, you gravitated to farms or whatever business was operating in the countryside, whereas now all of that's different.
Yeah. I guess, and also, in England especially, England and America, they say over 100 years ago, everyone was sort of involved with the land to some degree, and then everybody then gravitated to the nearest city because that's where the jobs started to become.
Yeah.
So that's weird in itself, that actually the farms, or at least the villages, were probably the most populated areas back in the day, and now not so much.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I think you can see this in a lot of developing nations that, farming's a sort of primary source of income and it's a big employer of people. And then, farms get profitable, then they get more mechanized, so it doesn't require the people. And then you'll have, I suppose, competition between farming and manufacturing for people. and so youngsters then start to drift away from the countryside, and you can kind of see it happening in lots of different countries. So the age profile of farmers tends to go up considerably then.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
So, do you find it's a problem with youngsters trying to come through to the industry that aren't, let's say, related to a farmer? Let's say.
I mean, we've got. Trying to think, we don't employ that many people, but we've got at least I would say half our workforce, and we're only talking, maybe 8 employees, if you like. About half of them, no background whatsoever in farming. In fact, there's one guy, he was a nightclub manager.
Oh, wow.
Down in Bournemouth, and he got into farming 3, 4, 5 years ago, maybe, and he's probably been with me a little over a year. But it's not unusual to find that. We had a great one. I'll just tell you this as an aside. I had a fellow apply for a job with me, and I interviewed him, and I didn't actually take him on, but he was the original bass player for Tubeway Army with Gary Newman. And he was going to go to agricultural college. That was his love. But he played the bass, ended up, doing God knows what with Gary Newman. And in his latter years, he was like, I want to come back to farming. But to be fair, I didn't take him on because I thought, this isn't rock and roll. Our hours are different. Yeah. I don't think this will work. But I think it's funny what attracts people in.
I'll tell you what's amazing. I've not watched it, but I've heard about it from many people, is that Country File's been on TV for longer than I've probably been born. And then you've got all the other farming TV shows, radio. And then Jeremy Clarkson does a TV show about farming, and everyone is obsessed with farms.
Yeah.
Now, that's got to be a good thing, though, right?
I think it's brilliant. I think, we struggle for labour big time, and particularly the last 2 or 3 years. And you often, you get very circumspect about the whole thing, and you kind of like, you look at what you're doing and you think, why can't we attract people? And partly probably because it's not that easy a job and the hours, and there's some obvious stuff. But there's something deeper, and I think it is that lack of, a lot of people don't have the chance to go on farms. They don't really connect with agriculture. They don't really see the world we operate in. And when you have somebody like Jeremy Clarkson, very well-known guy, very likeable personality, very good at kind of talking about a subject, when you see him approach farming and show how glorious it can be, but how difficult at the same time, it resonates. And I thought it was fantastic. And, I have read that it has prompted lots of young people who maybe would have gone into maybe an uninteresting job, or it's actually saying to people, well, look, hang on a minute, look at this, you could drive some big kit, you could be involved with livestock, you could be, it's not a job that's particularly corporate, if you like. There's not necessarily a massive managerial structure. And, all of that was shown in that programme. So, yeah, I think it's fantastic.
I was chatting to my nephew the other day, and he's just gone to work at a farm. He's always been into animals. And he said he has to kill the odd chicken, which makes him feel a bit weird. I told you that earlier.
Yeah.
And, he says, it's just really strange that he has to do that. But he said more than makes up for the fact that he can be out on the tractor with the other guys and just getting the fresh air and feeding the animals. And he said that really appeals to him, that bit, really loves that, And I think there's something, I don't know if you appreciate it, but is there something that makes you feel a bit closer to, I don't know, maybe just, how do I put this? Like close to earth almost, because you're touching it and feeling it and you're getting the fresh air and you're close to the seasons. Whereas for me, I just, the hours have gone back. Whereas you know it, you feel it. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, it's light there's a semblance of light when you leave the house in the morning.
Which you farmers really to blame for that time.
Yeah, you do. I mean, that's, I think, one of the things that we do appreciate, but we possibly in a lot of ways underappreciate. You do feel and see the seasons. You feel and see nature around you, which you probably wouldn't if you were in an urban setting. So, yeah, I think it's one of the real pleasures of being outside all day. This morning, I don't know what we are, March the 4th maybe today.
Yeah.
But, I mean, today actually felt like spring. It properly felt like spring
Yeah.
had started, and it just gave everyone a lift.
Yeah, but it does, doesn't it? If you get up and there's a nice little breeze, not too cold, just that nice sunshine, it must make you feel better than going out in the miserable rain.
It is fantastic. Yeah. I mean, it's lovely because we tend to start pretty early in the mornings, and you get that kind of like June, July when maybe you start sort of 5 o'clock or something. It's a lovely time of day. It's a really nice time of day that time of year, or early evening.
Yeah. Do you think colleges and schools and maybe, I don't know, local councils, whatever, do you think they could do more to get people interested in farming?
I think there was a big period where they tried, and we used to have school visits and stuff, and then our insurance company weren't so keen on the idea. So that was good when that was happening. Should people be more involved in agriculture? Obviously, my answer to that would be yes. I think it's a really important thing for people to understand where and how food comes from. It doesn't just arrive in a packet. You don't just take it off the shelves. There's a whole growing season behind it. There's a whole science behind it. There's a whole investment and hard work and time. You can't produce something from the ground or from livestock in 5 minutes. It's a 6-month, 12-month, 18-month project just getting that thing to market that's going to get consumed really quickly.
Do you think, though, that there could be more appreciation from, I don't know, whether it's, central government or the local councils? Because you guys are, and I know it sounds corny, but you are feeding the nation. And you mentioned earlier how sort of like farmers are getting older because maybe people aren't rushing to become farmers. Whereas if younger people were getting involved and they saw that it was a good career, then surely that would be a good thing, wouldn't it?
Yeah, it'd be hugely interesting. But I think successive governments, and I'm not whinging about it because I get it. Nothing's a crisis until it's a crisis. Yeah. Nobody foresees a crisis. So, you can and have parts of agriculture. We'll talk about food security and they'll talk about a multitude of potential problems. But nothing's a crisis till it's a crisis. Yeah. So I don't tend to get hung up on that sort of thing.
So you and Paul, did you always want to become farmers? What was the thing before?
Well, Paul did a university degree in business studies for 3 years, and he toyed with the idea of doing something in the city. I seem to remember in our early 20s, but he never pursued that. He was probably slightly more likely to farm than I was. Yeah. And I'd worked with the livestock at weekends to earn money and holidays, and I'd always enjoyed it. And then when I was 19, I went to Australia for a bit just to kind of sort my head out as to what I wanted to do. And I realised that I didn't want to be in a city. And then I realised I appreciated the farming a lot more. And I appreciated that was my destiny, was to work with animals actually more than farm.
And was there any pressure from parents?
No.
They were just like, do what you want.
Do what you want.
That's good.
Just be happy.
And did you go straight into sort of premium pork, or did that sort of come about after a few bumps, or was it just pork?
Oh, initially it was very much a standard commercial farmers. And then there was a period back in the 90s, excuse me, there was a period where the UK voted through, or Parliament voted through a load of welfare laws. And what it effectively meant were they were saying to farmers, right, you have a 10-year period, and in that period, when that finishes, you will not use this type of system, that type of system. And so pig farmers at the time were highly delighted about this, or they weren't delighted. They had to build new systems and stuff, but they were delighted in the sense that, okay, after this 10-year period, the UK has got new welfare laws, and that will apply to foreign meat coming over. That was the naivety of the British farmers' thought process. So prior to that, we started our first outdoor pigs. So we were kind of like very much doing the welfare thing. And then the ban came into effect. And unfortunately, what happened was it was perfectly legal. And in fact, it even remains legal, but the welfare laws are slightly different now. But so if you were a UK farmer, post that given date, which was 1st of January, I forget the year, excuse me, it was illegal for us to produce animals in a certain way. So you could be sent to prison. But it was perfectly legal for supermarkets or the MOD or anyone to bring in meat from those systems abroad and obviously undercut the UK. So what happened was you had a period of seriously bad profitability or big losses, excuse me, that went on for multiple years, and it resulted in 40% of the industry leaving, and it resulted in suicides and people losing homes and really horrible times. And excuse me, we as farmers, we protested. We were shutting down supermarket distribution centres and being very aggressive about the whole thing because we felt we were in the right. And I guess we were all looking to government to sort it out, and that's probably the last person you want to look to when you have a problem. So we realised, in the context of our own business, that we would have to very much do our own thing.
You see, it's a funny paradox, that, because do you remember a few years ago Sainsbury's took, I think it was Tesco, to court because, the price match thing.
Yeah.
And Tesco said, oh, we price match Sainsbury's or whatever. And Sainsbury's was saying, it was ham, I think, it was definitely ham. And they were like, no, you've not price matched it because this is, whatever, certified British, it's reared over here, I don't know, free range, whatever. I'm just paraphrasing now, it's 15 years ago. And Tesco's was from Poland. And they were saying it's not the same thing. Just because it's ham, that's where it ends. All similarity ends there.
Yeah.
And I think that's when I became aware of that situation. That but I don't know whose fault it is, whether it's Britain's fault or the European Union's fault or what. But it feels like to that story that you were saying, that you guys had to elevate your standards over here, and yet European countries didn't, or at least weren't. Or at least
they didn't have to do it. And you feel at the time, you feel incredibly let down by your big retailers. I mean, interestingly enough, probably in the last, excuse me, or prior to COVID, I went to a talk by one of the big supermarkets. I'm not going to say who because it's irrelevant in some ways who it is. And they had their corporate sustainability director talking. And they were talking about this particular supermarket and how it had all these animal welfare standards. So this was the start of the talk and how good they were at developing animal welfare standards and all the rest of it. And then halfway through the talk, they talked about how they have 3 tiers of livestock or pork. One is super animal welfare friendly, one is not as far, and then they have their everyday range, which is for people with a lower income. And I was with some people from another country, and they were like, well, 1 minute they're telling us they've got these standards, the next minute they're telling us they have to cater for everybody. And I think this is where it becomes, how the hell are you going to advance something? It's like me saying, well, I have morally I feel very strong about this, but I'm still going to sell that because at what point do we, or do we ever say, well, we feel strong enough about it that we're just going to outright?
So in your mind, is that the supermarket's job, the farmer's job, or is it the government's job to say, here's the lowest standard possible, you can't ever go below X?
I think if you're going to legislate from government, and I think when they did, the first real big welfare legislation was the pork legislation. It was about a system called sow stalls and tethers, a horrible system. Nobody would defend it. Still being used in America and other countries, but not a nice system. Very needed sorting out. And I think Parliament rightly decided to sort it out, but I don't think any thought was given to how do we deal with a situation where if we're expecting our farmers to improve animal welfare standards through legislation and law, which is probably, to be fair, it's probably the only way you can do it. So you do that, but if you then allow imports in from an invariably cheaper system or more efficient system, one or the other, then you undermine your farmers' profitability and you almost certainly replace your homegrown production with imported production from a lesser standard. And that's a massive negative. You haven't done anything for animal welfare. You've actually gone backwards on it.
Yeah.
So I think if it's going to be welfare, if it's going to be basic stuff that you can apply to everybody, it has to be legislation.
Yeah.
Then I think if you want, then you have to allow the market itself to either develop better standards, communicate them, and consequently charge more for the product, and hope they can reach enough consumers to do it. So that's where I think it probably. But the retailers, they have a massive responsibility because they shouldn't be talking about having high welfare standards if it's not applied to everything.
Yeah.
Or they'll say our fresh pork is, or our bacon is, but then they'll sell branded bacon on the same shelf. That's not.
Yeah.
And that's them being clever with words.
Yeah. I must admit, I think I told you last time, the best supermarket I've seen for it at the moment is probably, well, my local one is Aldi. I think I went through it after what you told me, looking at all the packaging, and everything had a British flag on it, and I was surprised by that because I was expecting to see again other brands with different labels on it, and there wasn't. I'd say 90% of the stuff I saw in there.
It probably is.
Which was a great surprise because ain't it odd that it's like the newest kid on the block, the German company actually promoting British meat, you know. It's a bit of a paradox, whereas you got like your Tesco's and your Sainsbury's that's, you know, getting it all from abroad. And I think the paradox I see is that there's this issue in England. I read a good book about this, and it said that as long as England's been doing trade deals, so probably over 150 years, they've always wanted to make importing food to the UK easy and cheaper, because then consumers have cheaper food, or at least access to cheaper food. How does that sort of bother farmers over here? Because I guess it's still tied to the original point, isn't it?
Yeah, I think if you looked at food cost as a percentage of take-home pay or income, you would find the UK, America, the lowest percentage around the world. So the UK has a cheap food policy. You know, it has a desire to keep the cost down to consumers, and I kind of get that. But there is a point when if you do that too much, you will stifle innovation. You will stifle everything at farm level. You will make it a very unattractive industry, and the rest of it. And I suppose, you know, if you look at the UK now, I feel, and I know my brother feels very similar, that we've got house pricing takes up such a vast amount of people's income. Why is inflation in house pricing good, but inflation in food bad? There's only so much money in the pot, and I think, you know, governments need to. They probably really need to just look at this stuff sometimes.
Yeah. If you was a government minister and you also know a lot about farming because you're a farmer, what's the ideal scenario? What would a lot of farmers be like? No, this is like, what is the obvious thing farmers see that ministers just don't see?
Yeah, good question. I think one is farmers are, whether they want to be or not, are custodians of the countryside. So if we as a society, we have a desire for our countryside to be farmed in a certain way, or looking after nature in a certain way, or farming our animals in a certain way, then that's a collective responsibility, a collective choice and a collective responsibility. So therefore, we have to make sure that the farmer, and I'm talking about general farmers here now, across the board, you've got to make sure that they're able to earn enough of an income to deliver it and deliver it properly. So, and I think that's one of the things. I think government, now and again, they will get involved in various schemes for farmers, and they'll be quite prescriptive. They won't suit everybody. They often they won't be attractive enough for farmers to get involved in. It would be better just to continue doing what they're doing. So I think they need to take a bigger look, a wider look at it. It's like if we all decide we want to support the environment more, then should you allow supermarkets to sell whatever they like if it undermines it? It's a difficult one because, as a farmer, I totally accept. We row our own boat. We during that crisis period, we realised there's no point looking to government legislation or anything, because you're fighting in the wind on this one. That we're going to have to just create our own market, a set of values that people want, and just go out and do our own thing. And that crisis prompted us to do it. But when you want to do something on a grander scale that covers the country, I think you've got to be very, very careful about imposing certain sanctions on a farming business or certain costs on a farming business. There's nothing wrong with that, but you cannot undermine them in the same hand and allow imports in.
So in your mind, just in terms of exports, or at least imports, shall I say, let's say meat was coming from Poland or Cyprus or wherever, it should meet the same standards. No one can argue with that one. Yeah, I think that's the most logical thing.
That's all you need to do.
Yeah, and then obviously what would probably end up happening in some ways is that the costs actually start to become very similar before exporting anyway. Because if they're doing everything the same way, the same level of investment, feed costs may slightly differ, and
it'll be negligible. It'll be currency related, but there won't be many factors. But it's almost. It's so logical that if you're going to set, it'd be like telling our car manufacturers in the UK, you've got to fit a bit of kit for safety. It's going to cost £1,000 a car or £2,000 a car, but we're not going to apply that to imported cars. Yeah. Well, the end result is whose car gets bought.
Yeah, exactly. But and also catastrophic results.
Yeah, exactly.
So, I do think, for me, like I was in Cyprus a few years ago, pre-COVID, and a friend of mine, my cousin his cousin is a butcher, commercial butcher, industrial butcher, whatever you call it. And we're walking around the site, and he was like, "Oh, we import meat all over the world." I'm sure they do. And I said, "I bet you don't sell a lot to England." Then he goes, "Why?" And I was like, "Well, you need BRC accreditation for a start, or at least the equivalent." He goes, "Oh, we can get all that, just like that. Oh, we can get all that." And I was like, "All right, how?" Bear in mind, I'm in this factory and it's a shit tip, And he's like, "Well, you go to the authorities over here. I guess agricultural authorities. I don't know. And we look after them. Okay, great. And we're in this factory, and the ribbon blenders that they put the meat in to." The vacuum ribbon blenders. The only reason you need one of those, the only reason, well, no, there's two reasons, I guess, is if you was putting a marinade on, and if you was putting water and phosphates in for it to absorb, the meat would absorb water. And I said, "So what you put in these?" And he goes, "A marinade," which means the latter, obviously. And then we're just walking around, and he's got dogs in there, and they're just following us around. And bear in mind, these ribbon blenders were on the floor. They were built into the ground. And I said to him, in England, you wouldn't be allowed that in the ground because that's where the rubbish also goes, And he was like, "Oh, no one ever tells us stuff like that." And I was like, and those dogs could have easily just picked up a bit of meat and carried on. And to think that meat was destined to go somewhere. And then it wasn't that long after the horse meat scandal happened, and it made complete sense to me. Complete sense. Because, Cyprus, they just don't care. They've got, and I think the more sort of away from the West you get, the less care there is. I know that sounds awful, but and I'm not trying to be derogatory about other countries because I'm sure there is some amazing farming practices, but this was just terrible, And you think, and yet I was telling a friend of mine, and he said, and this is the annoyance in England. When the EU stipulated something, the British did it. We implemented it mega fast.
Yeah.
Whether it was smoking or allergens or whatever. Even up to 4 or 5 months ago, people were telling me in Cyprus, you go to a pub and smoke inside. But they're part of the European Union. And you think, over here you can't. And I think I just think like it's one. Sometimes it feels like one rule for them, one rule for us. But the British have always been very good implementing good things, if that makes sense.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, you're so right. I mean, if we're going to decide on certain standards, and it could be animal welfare, it could be food hygiene, it doesn't really matter what it is, then you have got to unilaterally apply that to imports. Yeah. Because if you don't, you achieve nothing. You what's the point? And we seem to, time and time again, government doesn't seem to be able to get a handle on that side of things. Or, if we can't get a handle on it, then we have to encourage somehow homegrown production, so at least we can control what we're doing.
So talking about homegrown production, we were talking about the Ukraine-Russia thing that's going on at the moment, the invasion of Russia in Ukraine. And you mentioned a really good story about Putin and what he did with pig farming. And I thought that was really interesting. So we'll try to just bring that up to speed, bring everyone up to speed on that.
Okay. I've seen it happen before, actually. I guess a lot of people in catering will listen to this. Ireland, I used to go to Ireland probably 20 years ago, and Ireland went through this revolution of becoming a massive tourist destination. And as I understand it, from my time over there at the time, just visiting, what they did is they made it very attractive financially in terms of tax for people to invest in hotels, restaurants. And, I knew some of the guys in the pig industry there, and, they were big players, and they were making quite a lot of money at the time. They were all investing in hotels and restaurants because it was attractive. So the government said, we want more hotels and restaurants. We want to be a tourist destination. They made it attractive tax-wise, and that's what happened. And then they jigged the rules around. And I know that Russia, quite a large population, big country, rich in natural resources, very much went from a collective farms where nobody owned them. So they were had to employ hundreds of people, not mechanized, not efficient, more concerned with employing numbers of people. So when all of that finished, there was this period of some of that changing over to normal industry. But Russia, and I can't speak for the rest of agriculture, and Russia is a massive agriculture country, but certainly their pig industry, they were very, very quite low in terms of self-sufficiency for pork. Mm-hmm. I don't know what the figure was, might have been 40%, might have been 30%. And they decided that they wanted more food security. So what they did is, when big business was doing stuff over there, and I only know this because I spoke to somebody who was very familiar with it, probably in the last week, and they were saying, if Rio Tinto Zinc, for example, or somebody like that wanted to do a big mine or do something in Russia, there was a period there where they were told, yes, you can do that, but you need to build some pig farms as well. And they basically, that's how they created a situation where they started to get stuff being built. They then closed down any importation of pork at all from anywhere, and due to some sort of health reason, there wasn't a health reason. So what it did, it effectively made those that were farming pigs in Russia earn an absolute fortune. So it then became, unlike sort of lots of individual family businesses here, it became a much more corporate structure. And there was a lot of money to be made, so people kept reinvesting and having more pigs. So what they did is they went from a period of being massively deficient in self-production to being, satisfying their own domestic market. And now they're looking at being an export. So it was kind of very much, and often is the case, is somebody in government will decide this is the direction of travel. We have to make it attractive. Yes, in the short term, it means that a whole load of people are going to get quite wealthy. But over time, that will dilute down, and we will change the how this country operates.
Is there anything you could see where that would apply to the UK, that the government could do something like that? Or do you think that our government would just never do something like that?
I think you either have a situation where government says we need food security, or we don't want to rely on imports quite so much. So presumably that was a mix of that with the kind of Russian thing. or you have a situation where an entire industry decides it wants to move forward. So if you took the UK, and you've got a lot of great farming, and if you take Wales, if you drive through Wales, that's the backbone of Wales. Small family farms, can't do much with it. It's grass, really awkward. It's all on steep hills. So all those guys can do really is produce cattle and sheep. So they produce cattle and sheep for mainly the home market, I guess. But you could sort of say, well, why isn't Wales, Scotland, the eastern side of our country, why isn't it the breadbasket for beef, not just for us? Why are we not producing beef for other parts of the world? And that stuff like that could be an industry decision. I know in Ireland there's a big dairy company over there, and Ireland now is one of the, if not the top place to make baby formula milk. Most of it going to China. But somebody's took a decision that we're gonna do that with dairy farming in Ireland. It's a really positive thing because the farmers are suddenly, they're wanted, they're needed, they're being paid a price that they will do it, and a whole industry has kind of blossomed and got bigger. Because somebody's had the vision to put it together.
I think the thing with the paradox with farming is that it's not quite free market economics. There is government intervention. Then you've got farmers, like you say, going ahead and saying, no, let's do this. There's a bit of everything, isn't there, really?
There is. I mean, on the pig side, which is what we are, there's no government help. Never has been. So pigs has always been a standalone business. Beef and sheep and arable farming, there's been government intervention, partly because as part of Europe, everybody had it. Often what happens with a subsidy, it's just a subsidy on keeping the price of food down. Somebody pays somewhere along the line for a subsidy. I'm not a major fan of any of that. I'm far more, right, we either have an industry in our country or we don't. And whilst I love farming, whilst I want to see the whole of the UK being farmed, none of us as farmers have a right to that market. It is a little bit more difficult than a normal business in the sense that if the public wants the countryside to look like it does need to be viable. Yeah. So you've kind of got something else going on. But I'm a big fan of, it's up to us to make it attractive. Where I think we need government help is if we decide on a set of standards for this country, they must not undermine that.
Yeah.
By allowing
others to bring it in. So in your mind, just to clarify that one, you'd rather see no government subsidy, but the free market to flourish and invest and treat it like a business almost.
I think, yeah, I mean, there's a New Zealand massive producer of lamb. They had a system of government subsidies and they were all stripped away, I don't know, maybe 20 years ago. And everybody in the UK and all the farming press were talking about it and saying, oh, look, New Zealand's going to get its act together and all the rest. And I know from speaking to somebody in New Zealand, it was a torrid time. Values of livestock plunged half overnight. Farms got lost. There was huge change. But now they have a much more stronger lamb business. They're much more focused on exports. They're much more focused on quality of what they're doing. And in some ways, the subsidy system, although getting rid of it was probably horrible and probably should have been staggered, maybe. On the other side of it, it was actually, they were more market driven.
Yeah. But I guess if there's a subsidy there, there's too much too much of a cushion in case something goes wrong, and then you don't really think about getting it right as much, I guess.
100%. Yeah. I mean, it's like, if the government gave us money to do less work, we'd do less work. You have to have, you have to have an incentive to do stuff. So if you took our situation, prior to setting up our brand, we were normal pig farmers, and we hit a horrendous market scenario, so we were losing a lot of money. So we would not have been able to carry on for the longer term. So suddenly, from a difficult situation, we decided, right, well, we have our own brand and we're going to do this and we're going to create our own market. And easier said than done, but through adversity comes a change of thought process and stuff. So I'm with you on that. I think when you start to fiddle around with markets and subsidize, and you're not necessarily getting innovation. You're not getting market driven scenarios.
Yeah, I'm just trying to think. Like, if back then they said to you, "Oh yeah, you're not getting the yield you need, or you're not getting the prices that you need, but here's X to top you up," you would have just carried on maybe and just plodded along and
probably
and just carried on, not doing great, and maybe got a bit worse year after year until you think, "Fuck it, I'm retiring," and
possibly,
and then you sort of end up a miserable, bitter old farmer. Whereas what you've sort of done is you and your brother have gone the harder route to some degree.
Guarantee that.
You've sort of stressed yourselves out trying to learn something new and do something better, and that's what sort of started in a way, isn't it? And I guess what I'm sort of interested in is why they choose some animals to give farmers subsidies for and not others. And why do sort of it almost like
I really don't know the answer to that one.
It almost feels like no one likes the pig.
Right? It's possibly.
It's like,
it must check your register of members' interests and see if anyone owns one.
Yeah.
You'll probably find there's quite a few there's almost certainly a few landowners and beef owners. I don't know. It's not a bad thing. I mean, it's not a bad thing because, like I said, the mindset's very different.
Yeah, it's always interesting I read a story about New Zealand lamb, and it said how they had a technology or a system that they used to sort of get as much protein and meat on the legs, because that was where they make most of their money, on the leg. Especially Brits, we all look at leg of lamb, don't we?
Yeah.
So they'd figure out the system to make sure that their legs had the most amount of sort of meat and protein. And yet, to think of that, like, I wouldn't have thought that. And then I was talking to a chemist that I know the other day, because we make some cleaning products. I was talking to a chemist, and he says that in America, they feed cows with their silage and their corn or whatever.
Yeah.
But they put, I can't remember how much it is, but a portion of bicarbonate of soda in their food. And what it means is that they actually consume more food, but fart less. Yeah.
Right. I must get myself some.
I've got no problem with it eating a lot. It's just a fart. Yeah. But, and it was just really interesting that something so simple can, do that. And I just found it incredible. Whereas I guess with pigs, you don't really have that problem. They just eat whatever, don't they? I guess.
You don't have the same problem. I mean, it's very interesting because if you have a population of animals or plants, so if post the Second World War, it was all about a drive for production in farming, across farming. The government wanted farmers to produce more. So they probably, I guess they invested in helping farmers find the technology, and there was a lot of R&D would have gone on, and whatever aspect of farming you're in, you'll always have some crops, some varieties of crops. Some type of potato will grow quicker than another type. So we went through this period of this massive push for output, and it went on across the world. And if you have a population of animals or a carrot or a type of vegetable, you're going to have some that, as I said, grow quicker than others. You're going to have some that take up more water. So what happens is people start to sort of really look at it. They start to interbreed. They start to develop those characteristics. So when they talk about, you were saying in terms of a cow, if you want your animal to grow quicker, then you will measure feed intake. So feed intake's a great measure of how much does that animal eat, because the more it eats, the more growth you get. So if you were trying to improve the speed at which animals grow, one of the characteristics you'd be measuring would be feed intake.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Because again, that just wouldn't think about it normally. And over the years, since World War II, growth rates have gone up, and also cull rates, well, as in age rates of death, has come down. So, look at a chicken. I think in 1957, when my dad was born, the average chicken at death was about 900 grams maybe. Skinny little legs,
Yeah.
And then now I think, it took 3-4 months for them to sort of do that cycle. Whereas now it's like, I think it's like 5 weeks, and they're 4.1 kilos average weight.
Yep.
And you think, that's incredible, that I think anyway.
Yeah, it is. I mean, one of the things that's been, huge, that's why the cost of food has continued to go down relative to incomes, or down relative to inflation, is that farmers have been very successful at growing more per acre or growing a chicken faster. And all of it's been done by natural selection, breeding, identifying the characteristics you want. I mean, my beef with it all, or my big bugbear with it all, is so you've got farmers who've been challenged since the Second World War to produce more. They've done a very, very good job. But in my opinion, it's been done at the expense of taste. So if I was reading something on the internet, any of your listeners could look it up. But if you look at the level of vitamins in vegetables, say from 50 years ago to now, it's quite frightening. So yes, we've got a vegetable that takes up loads of water, it grows really quickly, but certainly probably doesn't taste the same, and certainly doesn't deliver the same nutrients, because it's become all about allowing that supermarket to have more of the same thing at less. That's where the pressure's been on.
Yeah. I think, if we look at a tomato as an example, a tomato that's, I don't know, grown in a glass room in Holland, it is perfectly round. It's got that a tomatoey colour, but it's not reddish. It's not, it's not a vibrant red, and yet you go to Rome, and I guess it's in the market, so it's already like your Waitrose product anyway, to be fair. But you see the tomatoes there, and they're lumpy and bumpy, and they've got, they're just, you eat one, and your brain explodes a little bit. Whereas you eat a tomato from over here, and it's just like, well, it's not really from over here because we imported it, but it's just like, I don't know, it's just no, and it's almost like these heritage breeds have just been completely forgotten about, and I wonder if, with modern farming and heritage breeds, could they still get great yields? Maybe not as great as,
I think that's if you take let's just take livestock production, as it's my field, I suppose. Because most farmers, 80% of farm produce goes through the big 5 supermarkets. So what the supermarkets want massively influences agriculture, the biggest single driver. In fact, a lot of people will tell you that food service more often than not gets what retail doesn't want. Okay. So if the supermarkets, if it's all price matching and the lowest cost of a basket, their message downwards to farmers is pressure on the price, and it's a commodity, so you've got no control over it in most farming businesses. So then it does become about yield and output and not about taste. And yes, you could start to look at it and say, well, look, hang on a minute, we will bring back an old variety of tomato, but maybe we'll do something so we can make it grow quicker or whatever. It's all feasible. But unless that product is going to be sold under a brand to identify it, there's no mileage for the farmer to do it. In other words, if you go into Tesco's or Sainsbury's, the vast majority of meat is totally unbranded. That's the way they want it. They don't want brands because they want to be able to move that production to another big processor. Yeah. They want to be able to keep the squeeze on. So if you as a farmer are producing either a tomato that's going to get sold as a Tesco tomato or a piece of pork or a piece of beef, there is no value you are not going to get paid for that extra taste. If they decided to brand it as something, or you branded it as something and created to market, then yes, and that's your problem with it.
So with you guys at Dingley Dell, your meat to some degree, your pork, is probably not recognisable in some ways to the stuff that's on the shelf.
It'd be very different.
Yeah.
I mean, I suppose, going back on the statement I just made, in our scenario, we did all of that work on improving stuff ourselves, and then had to try and build a market at the same time. It's not easy.
What was the most challenging thing at the beginning? Because obviously you led the way. Nobody else really did this before you, or at least maybe there was and you didn't know them. You go out there and you say, yeah, we're not going to do this no more. We're not just selling it as a commodity. So what came first? Was it the name? Was it the idea? Was it breeding differently? Or has everything just evolved?
What really happened, we were just in very, very challenging times in terms of profitability. And it had been going on for a long time. And we were like other farmers. We were like, don't know what to do. Relationships between farmers and retailers, or inevitably the relationship is with the processor, the guy that buys the meat. They're quite poor and fractious relationships. They're based on price. And, you've always, or at the time, with us, it was like, well, you can only have this much this week, or I'll get it from Belgium.
Okay.
At that price. So you haven't got you've not always had. There are exceptions to that, but you have this period where you just don't. As a farmer, you're at the bottom of the supply chain. You're interchangeable, and you're weak. And we came up with the idea. In torrid times of when nobody gives a shit about us at the bottom of the pile, how do we sort this out? And it was, if we launch our own brand, and if it is successful, i.e., if people are picking it up, and we did initially work with supermarkets, if people are picking it up, then suddenly we are a massively valued partner in that supply chain. In other words, that does not reach that shelf unless we put animals on a wagon, unless we produce animals. And therefore, if everyone else is earning an income in the chain and has a market that effectively we've created, they're going to have to treat us as an equal, and we will have more opportunity to have a better or more sensible or more viable price. So that was the thinking behind it. And it's absolutely in retrospect, it's absolutely bang on thinking.
Yeah.
But in our situation, it's the farmer that owns the brand.
Yeah.
And obviously, if you then, over time, if you gather brand loyalty and you're able to, you're able to charge more, then you can start to innovate at farm level. You can really, really move forward.
Yeah. I think the cheeky thing is, to some degree, do you remember the story about, I think it was probably recent, maybe in the last 5-6 years, where Tesco named their meat packets.
They're always doing it.
Yeah, they're always doing it, aren't they? To make it look like it's their farm or a farm.
Yeah.
Whereas really, it's just, again, it's come through,
farmers regularly try and take the big retailers to trading standards and stuff over stuff like this. And inevitably nothing gets done.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And it's so inherently wrong, because if you as a consumer, if you are in a supermarket or a butcher shop or wherever you are, and you're buying something that gives you the illusion it's from a farm, one farmer, or one specific type of production, maybe over several farms, then that's what it should be. If it's not that, if it's, I think you're referring to the only one Woodside Farm, which I think is a chicken one.
Yeah.
But there are multiple, and they'll all be doing it. If that farm doesn't exist, why on earth are they getting away with calling it a farm?
I'm just trying to think,
because they're trying to cash in on the
fact that it's a farm.
This comes from a lovely jolly farmer, and
whereas it's not. It's come from it's like, it's really difficult, because I'm trying to figure out now, about the branding and the terminology, and it's the word farm that throws you. If they just called it Woodside,
but you walk around a supermarket and you look at the wording, you look at the advertising, you look at how many of these food brands, they're all trying to appeal that it's, I mean, how many times do you see a pizza and it's handmade by some large Italian lady in a farmhouse, and it isn't made by some, and this is where I think, sensible people will see through this stuff, but they're all trying to do it.
Yeah.
There are very few, in my opinion, there are very few brands that have real integrity in what they say.
I think I'd rather just go for example, hand-fried crisps. Have you heard this one? So hand-fried crisps almost insinuates that someone is tossing them in the hot oil with a hand. Whereas all they're doing is using a handle to move the crisps. That's all they're doing.
It's like handmade, isn't it? I mean, what isn't handmade?
Yeah. Although me and my friend have got this obsession with watching. It's a guy on Facebook or wherever he is, YouTube, whatever, and the videos end up on Facebook primarily. It's called the Food Ranger, and he goes all over the world. This guy and eats food everywhere, and he goes to Pakistan a lot. And my friend's from Pakistan, and you'll see them, and they've got this huge fryer in front of them, this huge vat. We're talking, it's like, I don't know, 2 meters wide, full of oil, and it's powered by coal underneath. And there's this Pakistani guy sitting in his Asian clothing, the local clothing, and he's sitting on let's say on the top bit where the oil is near.
Yeah.
And he's got no shoes on.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I'll say to my mate, like, they're foot fried crisps, not hand fried crisps. But that's just a little tangent. But it's just, I suppose that probably goes back to British standards again and how high they are. But I think ultimately, there is an issue where someone can say something like hand-fried crisps or, blah, blah, blah. And it's just really, but the farm issue is a big one. Like, I think Aldi call theirs Ashfield Farm.
Yeah, I mean, I think they've all done it because they know that if you can give that illusion of, a farm and a place, it personalises it a bit more because, in my experience, consumers, and I can only really talk from food service because that's been our thing. A lot of the people we meet, or when I say a lot of them, all of the people we meet, for them, the important thing is this is a connection this is a real farm. We can come and look, we can see what they're doing, we can understand what they're doing. And that's the draw for a lot of these guys because, it's difficult for a restaurant or a supermarket inevitably to source something from one farm because, the farm may not be big enough, may not have the logistics.
Well, even so, it'd be nice if they put a label on there saying, as an example, this meet one of the farmers, not the farmer, but one of them.
Yeah.
That would still go a long way rather than making up a completely fake brand.
I'm with you 100%. I mean, I'm not making excuses for them. I think to the detriment of farmers that they do this.
But they don't want to highlight the farmer though, because that gives the farmer more power, and they don't want the farmer to have more power.
This is what it ultimately comes down to. It is the whole sort of farming to retail or the whole food supply chain, and especially if you look at maybe the last 20 years. There's only so much value in it, and everyone's fighting for that share of the value. And if you can replace the farmer, well, you can go abroad and buy it if it's a bit cheaper. You can, and that's what's been happening.
Yeah. One thing again that strikes me as odd is that it's just something you mentioned. I just want to go back to it before we carry on. Before I forget, is you mentioned that after World War II, the government really incentivised farmers and so on. We couldn't be any further away from that now. Whether you get a little bit of incentives or not, no one celebrates the farmer in the UK.
Well, I suppose post World War II, the food supplies could have been held up, or probably had rationing for a start. So I suppose it makes it focuses the mind on a lot of people saying, do you know what, we need to safeguard some of our food production. We need to encourage it. Not necessarily pay them to do it, subsidise them, but we actually need to make sure that we've got that. Because they'd had 2 world wars in a very short period of time, hadn't they? Whereas I suppose now we've got, we're in a very interconnected world, and sometimes it makes sense for stuff to be grown in other countries, not this one. It
makes sense. Yeah.
There's no issue with importing stuff, but I guess you have to be. There are multiple reasons why it's probably best to have some production, something to eat, should it all go wrong.
If we see what's happening right now in Ukraine, and I think I saw that the American wheat markets have gone up 46% in a month, which is probably realistically higher than that as well. And that's mostly down to speculators. The wheat is still out there; it's just speculation. A friend of mine said yesterday he was about to order some fish, and the same stock cost him £40 a case more just because they saw that there was some more activity, war activity. So speculation's a big thing,
Oh, it's awful. It's awful. We've seen it. Our feed is 70% of our costs. So the cost of feeding a pig is by far and away the biggest cost we have. It's massive. And you have a futures market for soya, wheat, barley, all the components of the feed. And obviously when futures markets were set up, who knows when, hundreds of years ago probably, it was basically a farmer and a merchant, and the merchant being the user, the guy who was making bread from the wheat or putting it into livestock feed. Buying forward was a way of saying, well, I think next harvest is going to be this. I'm going to need 200 tons of grain. And the person that you sold it to, or the person that the farmer sold it to, it was an end physical user. What's been happening, and it's got really bad in pig feed. Well, not pig feed. It's got really bad in soya and wheat the last 20 years, but particularly the last 2 years. The futures market for commodities, it's volatile. The weather's it's dry in the States today. The price goes up 10 quid a ton. It rained in the States tomorrow. The price is down, and you've got multiple hedge funds and pension funds and speculators bidding on a upswing in price. And it really hurts the physical user, the livestock farmer and that. And not just that. I mean, it pushes up the price of food to poorer nations. And I feel very strongly that no one should be allowed to buy grain futures that doesn't take physical delivery of it, because you've got a scenario. You can have a scenario where there's quite a bit of grain in the world. There's enough for all of us, but the price goes through the roof because the hedge funds are sitting on it. And they're smart guys. They'll have worked out, if we sit on enough of it, put enough money into it, we can keep the price high.
Where we need it.
And you've got that going on now. You've got, the situation with Ukraine. And of course, they produce 29% of the world's wheat, Ukraine and Russia. So our ports have banned boats coming in. They've probably got logistic problems, obviously, getting stuff out. So, yeah, obviously you're expecting some movement in price or some difficulty in maybe obtaining the commodity. But what's clearly happening in a wartime scenario, as ever, the boys in suits are trying to make money out of the crisis. And, I feel quite strongly that's morally wrong, and it could be simply solved.
Yeah, I think a lot of people have told me that if they were prime minister or whatever, because I guess you can't just do it in one country, you'd have to be a global coalition, they'd stop the speculation of food because it's food.
Yeah, I think what you want, agriculture will always be supply and demand. In times of good harvest, supplies will be abundant and slightly cheaper. The same way as it is in normal life. You go to buy something, if there's plenty of them around, loads of people are making it, it's a bit cheaper if it's quite scarce.
Yeah. It's
simple supply and demand. Agriculture, by its very nature, will always be supply and demand. But when you have this kind of activity going on, the ultimate downfall will be people pay more than they have to, and that's not ethical.
No, not at all.
In food,
and especially it's the other so the other sort of flip side of the fact that the government in this country want cheaper food. Well, if they stop people messing with it,
would help.
It would help, wouldn't it?
Massively.
Yeah. And also, one thing that stood out to me, so let's zone into the farm for a little bit. When we went on our tour a couple of weeks ago, I got my wellies on. And I thank you, actually, because being in your pickup truck boosted my immune system.
I bet it did. I bet it did. It probably challenges everything, my pickup truck.
Yeah, so I felt great afterwards.
I could have got one of the boys you could have hopped in the back of one of them council wagons that picks a bin up, and you'd have felt cleaner.
I actually feel like it's better than penicillin, that immune system booster. I think you had probably every form of bacteria living in there.
I would imagine so.
Probably make some cheese out of it somewhere. But no, so joking aside, one thing that we noticed that we drove past quite a few pig farms, I guess, we saw a lot of them, but there was no sort of grass on them. There was quite muddy and dirty. And I know people say, pigs are happy and shit. They always say that, But when we got to your pigs, they were all on grass, and and obviously the pens, what are they called? Little houses. Huts.
Yeah. Little houses.
Someone will listen to this and laugh at me later. Houses.
Yeah.
Pigs have houses. But no, their houses. But, they're on grass. And I think that was quite, what's the importance of that?
Well, the standards, where we are in the east of England, you've got lovely light sand. So it's particularly effective for keeping your breeding animals outside. So you've got multiple farms in East Anglia because of the temperate climate, lack of rainfall, but more importantly from the sandy soil. And there's a strip that runs along near the coast called the Sandlings. So you've got several farms along there, ourselves being one. Standard thing with outdoor pigs is you're part of a crop rotation. So this area of the world is massive for growing vegetables, absolutely massive. So it's very poor land. The farmers have irrigation and they're producing huge amounts of vegetables, but it's important they rest their fields or they have a crop rotation. Outdoor pigs or breeding animals is a fantastic crop rotation for them because potatoes you can only grow 1 in 5 years on a piece of land. So sometimes you've just got to not rest this land, but you want to get an income from it, do something different. You put pigs on it, pigs naturally turn over all the soil, they'll grub out any volunteer potatoes or anything that's going on. They will also crap all over the land, so it adds some structure and fibre. So natural fertiliser, plus also it improves the water retention capability of the soil. It adds more texture to it. So most farms that you see driving past will be part of a rotation. Invariably, the pig farmer will not be the landowner. He will almost certainly be renting that land. So your standard thing would be you go and you have an agreement with a larger farmer or an estate that you're going to have pigs there for the next 10 years, for example, and you require X acres a year for your pigs, and they will move you every 3 years. So you'll go onto a different field. So what people will tend to do is move onto a field, leave the pigs there for 3 years. The pigs will just strip anything that's on the field in next to no time. 6-8 weeks, they've just took most of it off. And so you get that kind of bare, barren look. And what we wanted to do, partly we wanted our pig unit to look and be different. So there's always a lift. If you move the animals from dirt, where they've been for quite a while, if you move them onto nice fresh grass, that you will get a production lift for a short period of time because you're on clean ground and you're on nice flat ground because you've just drilled it. So we came up with a system, or my brother came up with a system probably 10 years ago that, right, yes, we will move onto a field for 3 years, but within the context of the 3 years, we'll move at least every year. So we created sort of like farming pigs in strips. So if you can imagine, strip of pigs, nothing but the same size, strip of pigs, nothing but the same size. Then what you do is, on that land, where you haven't got pigs, you can grow grass, you can grow flowers, you can do whatever you like. You can support nature, and then when that area has ceased to do that, you can move the pigs onto that bit the same way across the whole field, and then you can drill again behind you. So it started with moving them more frequently, so the animals got a production lift, that it was a nicer place to work for my guys. And then it became about, well, why can't we support nature on those strips? But it's very different to what you would drive past.
Yeah, no, definitely. And do you think, talking of accreditations, you guys obviously do it the right way, but are you affiliated with any accreditation?
Yeah, we have to have 2 of the accreditations, because if we don't sell everything under our own label, it might have to go into factory. And if it's not carrying Freedom Foods or the Red Tractor, you can have issues moving it or selling it. So we retain those 2 accreditations. We don't overtly advertise it because we don't want people to think what we're doing is the norm for those accreditations. It's not. We go way beyond it. Yeah. They're minimum, particularly Red Tractor. It's just a minimum standard.
Yeah.
What do I think of the accreditations? I think initially these bodies are created for the right reasons. So if you take the Red Tractor, it was probably about, let's make sure that every farm in the UK farms to a certain standard, especially in terms of food safety, so that the processing side is audited as well. And then we'll look at what the farmers are doing. And so it probably starts off as not a bad thing. It's an industry auditing itself. It has, spot checks, and it's probably all right. But the problem is that they then become an industry within an industry, and they start insisting on more and more different rules, and a lot of them don't make any sense.
Yeah.
And if you're not careful, the schemes become, well, as long as you've got it written down on paper that you do this or you do that, or in the event of whatever. And actually what is important is how those animals are being looked after on any given day.
Yeah.
The attitude of those working with them and the skill set of those working with them. And sometimes when or if we have audits, well, we do have audits from these people, it just seems like, well, stop looking at bits of paper in my fucking office and let's go and have a look at what we do.
Yeah.
That's how it feels to me.
Yeah.
And I think with our situation, I don't think my market want to know how many water nipples a pig's got and exactly how many meters of space it has got and stuff like that. I think what's important is people understand, look, this is how we're looking after them. You can come and see them at any time. And, this is what we're committed to. We are committed to, improving nature. We're committed to all these different things. So I'd quite like to, in time, I'd like to write my own scheme that was externally audited. But I think we've put too much emphasis as a society on box ticking exercises.
Yeah, I agree. And I guess for you, you've put so much back into sort of like that. Right, let's rephrase that. Tell me a little bit about your breed selection program, your breeding program.
Because where it gets really interesting.
Yeah, no, because I think it is, and I think you wouldn't go to this much effort if you wanted to treat your animals badly anyway. Like you just wouldn't, I guess. Like, so you treat them well because you've gone to also this much other effort to sort of to make.
Yeah, I think the sort of the treating animals well bit. I think no one goes into farming livestock that doesn't like livestock. Okay, I'll rephrase that slightly. You don't get many bad farms or bad farmers, in my opinion. Most people go in for because they actually enjoy the animals. And if you want to be, from an economic point of view, if you're not treating them well, they're not going to perform well. Yeah. So, why, it's most of the time, it ain't going to happen. you know, on our place, personally, I feel, and I tell all the guys I work with, look, guys, I don't pay the wages. Pigs pay the wages. The animals pay the wages. So first and foremost for us is, we're privileged to work with livestock, and we've got to do our absolute utmost every day to provide these animals with what they want, and it's a given. And that's the kind of people we employ. That's the culture we want. We're working with them. We're going to respect them. We're going to make sure that they are very comfortable around us. I mean, this is just a very quick aside for anyone listening. There's a phenomenal guy, I can't remember his name now, but I went to a talk. He's an Australian welfareist, and he spoke when I was in my early 20s. If you go on a farm, there are 3 reactions you're going to get. So if you as a chef or someone, you visit a farm, A, the animals run away from you. B, the animals are not bothered about you but don't come towards you. And C, the animals actually come towards you and want to be stroked or whatever. You've got 3 scenarios there. If they run away from you, they're scared of people. If they're scared of people, it means any interactions they have with the people looking after them are potentially negative because they're scared of people. If the animals are totally not bothered by you but don't have come across to you, it means that the people looking after them are doing nothing to harm those animals or upset them. They're not scared of people, but there is little or any human-animal interaction. If, however, you go on a farm where within 30 seconds you're approached by some of the animals, you're never going to be approached by them all, but a majority of the animals come across to you, sidle up to you, and they want to be stroked or whatever, that's it. You've just judged the welfare on that farm in less than a minute. If that's happening, I guarantee you, no one working on that farm is upsetting those animals.
It's true.
That's 100% true.
Yeah. Animals are smarter than people think.
Yeah, they will react to the scenario. So we spend a lot of time, particularly with our breeding stock, talking to them. If you're checking them, you walk past, you run your hands down the side, and you get this great human-animal interaction. Not on every animal, but you get this great sort of where they sidle up. They're not bothered if they're giving birth. You could get in a hut with them. They want to scratch. That's the kind of relationship I want on my farm between all of us that look after the animals and the animals.
Yeah. No. Well, that sounds like the best way to be.
Yeah. And I don't think it's not about an assurance scheme telling you got to do this or you got to do that. That's just having the right people in the right frame of mind.
I don't care what assurance scheme or accreditation it is. They're not going to tell you to be friendly to animals or be nice, are they?
No. But on so many levels, one, you're more involved with those animals. 2, they're going to perform better because they're not scared. You're not going to get bit.
No.
These sows, if they've just had a litter, they can be quite motherly, with newborns. They can be a little bit snappy.
Yeah.
So if you've kind of like got that trust between you, you're far less likely to have any problems.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit about the breeding program.
When we set up the whole Dingley Dell thing, we're going to make this about taste, welfare, and sustainability, and that was the best part of getting towards 20 years ago. And over time, we've been able to innovate and understand and improve on our techniques for delivering all 3 of those. And for me, the real thing that we've really pushed on and probably makes us far more unique than most is the taste aspect. So if you went back about 11 years ago, I suppose it is now, we'd set up the brand, we were selling around the UK, we were dealing with some big names in hospitality. And we'd made a few we'd made some decisions at farm level as to how we could make an animal that would taste better, or we'd feed it differently, and so on. And then one day I was walking around the farm and I thought to myself, well, I'm not a pig producer anymore, I'm a food producer. I need to understand far more about, the taste aspect and how you improve it. And as I was kind of explaining earlier, for many, many years, farming has been about output and speed of growth, and not enough attention has been given to taste. So we'd done a few things at farm level, but, we just had this sort of clarion moment where, our product is ending up in some very fine establishments, but we've got no science behind it. We've got no proper science behind it. So we got involved with a meat scientist called Caroline Mitchell, and who we still work with. And Caroline is one of a few people around the world that go by the term of meat scientist. So a meat scientist would be responsible for looking at a whole supply chain. So it would be looking at the farm. It might be looking at the processing and the pH levels and whether they hung animals, but all the factors that influence taste. To give you an idea, at the time, Caroline was doing some work with Morrison's and Sainsbury's, and their brief to her, or certainly Sainsbury's brief to her, was we've got 3 different ranges of pork in our store, and our Taste the Difference range is supplied by multiple farmers, but we're experiencing a lot of inconsistency in it, and we feel that consumers' experience should be pretty much the same across that range. So in that scenario, there was no more money for the farmer on the table, and so someone like Caroline would go in and say, right, well, we need to standardise how these farms work in terms of breeds used, in terms of nutrition, etc. We went to Caroline and we said, well, look, this is where we are now. We're supplying a load of fancy places. We get good feedback, but we've got no science behind it, and we want to really understand how we can push this forward at farm level. So the first big question is, what constitutes taste? What is taste in meat? And 100% the answer is it's the level of marbling or intramuscular fat. And if you take the beef industry, most chefs are very familiar with it. The more marbled a piece of meat is, hence the popularity of Wagyu or Wagyu crosses, it's going to taste better. Now, cattle, they're ruminants. There's a high degree of breeding in there, but you can achieve some effect through nutrition. Pigs, totally different. So she made it quite plain to us that it's the level of marbling that you're looking for. So, and we did loads of taste trials with her under scientific protocols, and we realised after a fairly short period of time that if we wanted to produce better pork, and that was our goal, was to totally understand taste and totally to drive it by whatever means necessary. Because quite simply, if our meat can deliver a better eating experience, I've got a better chance of sustaining my brand where I want it to be, and or potentially being able to move my price on if that's what we're looking for. So, how do we create the most amazing tasting pork? Well, how do we try and create it? Pretty much every pig farmer around the world buys their breeding stock in. So they will buy in the sow, they will buy in the boar from a breeding company. A breeding company's role a breeding company exists to provide farmers with livestock. So a chicken breeding company would, if they can create a line of chicks that grow quicker, that's a massive value to the commercial farmer. So a breeding company, and let's talk pork. Pork has been, it's a low-priced item in the supermarket. It's the cheapest protein. It's in the farmer's interest to produce more of it. Its margins are very, very slim. So the breeding company's job is to produce a male and a female that a farmer will then buy and then cross at farm level. So the breeding company needs to produce what the farmer wants. So if the farmer wants speed of growth, greater use of feed, more numbers born, these are the characteristics that the breeding company needs to work on. So what they'll do is they will have various pure lines or lines of breeding animals, very different to animals for processing, and they will basically have a big population over a period of time. They will, let's say they're chasing speed of growth. They will identify the most fastest growing animals, and then they will breed them to the most fastest growing animals, and they will repeat that generation after generation. Because computer programs have become the norm and vast in the last 20, 30 years, when they find a fast growing animal, in olden days, you would have looked and said, well, that's a fast-growing animal, I'll use that. Or I've got two fast-growing animals here. A grew quicker than B, I'll use A. Now they're able to say, well, A's growing quicker than B, but let's have a look at A's cousins, mother, father, grandparents. So you can actually this computer system will go out there and is that a family trait? Is A or B, which one is the most likely? So you might have one that grows a little bit slower as an individual, but its families vastly outperform the other family. So this is sort of like natural selection. So what we did is we knew that if we could create breeding stock that had more marbling, that would filter down to our commercial pig for processing. So we got hold of a breed called the Red Duroc. We got hold of 70 different animals. We got a very large breeding company involved to oversee the project, provide us with the software. We brought in technology from the States. So what we can effectively do is we brought in 70 breeding females. We've expanded that up quite a bit since then. We were able to create our own breeding company. And instead of us concentrating on speed of growth, lots of numbers born, and making throughput the be-all and end-all, we made IMF, or marbling, the actual goal. So we basically made mating decisions to produce breeding stock. So in other words, we were mating animals together, and the animals that we produced we weren't going to use for processing, we were going to use for breeding. So we have to be very careful we don't interbreed. So the computer program's set up so that it knows all your animals, it knows all their histories. So sometimes you can only breed this female with those males, but not those. So, but effectively, what we're doing is we're chasing marbling in the same way that people have chased growth or any other characteristic. We've made the computer system respond. It's like 90% of the trait we're looking for is marbling. Yes, we pay a tiny bit of attention to growth. We don't want something that grows dreadfully. And that's how we've done it. And we've been working on it now for probably 10 years. So we've probably done 20 generations of it. At what we call the top of our pyramid, if you like, which is what we call great-grandparents, we're improving the marbling about 15% year on year. That is filtering down in the offspring. And basically what we've done, trying to do in the process of, is produce breeding stock that's capable of delivering this day in, day out. So you've got that consistency. You will always have an amount of difference between individual animals.
Yeah.
But if you're raising the average year on year, so that's what we've been doing for 20 generations. We have been approved by DEFRA. So to run a program like this, you have to to be a breeding company, which technically we are now in DEFRA's eyes. You have to submit to them. This is my program. This is my protocols. These geneticists are involved. These people are involved. So look, this is absolutely 100% being done properly. So we submitted that. We've called our animal the Suffolk Red. They approved that. So we have our own breed. Uh-huh. We have adapted a previous breed, but it's our own breed. If we do this, if we continue to do this for 40 years from our point of starting, that is classed as 2 generations, and then it will become a native breed, which would be fantastic. Except, I don't think I'll be around to see that. But so that's what we've done, and it's a massively interesting thing to do. It's massively complex, massively interesting, because we've literally taken control of the direction of travel of everything we produce. And I think there's there's 2 or 3 of us in the world doing this.
Wow, that's not a lot, is it?
It's not a lot, but you have to have an end market.
Yeah,
you couldn't do this if you didn't have an end market.
Yeah, you can't start fresh. You've got to have a customer base that appreciates what you're doing before you do it, I guess.
Yeah, or you develop the two side by side. But quite simply, I mean, if you look at the pork industry, it's pretty much the same the world over. There are some exceptions. The Iberican industry. There's a Kuribota in Japan, which is different, but most of it's the same, using the same stock.
So why is it two things? A, why is pork the cheapest meat? And secondly, why does nobody ever care about marbling in pork?
Why is it the cheapest meat? Probably cattle and sheep, it's a long gestation, a long growth period. They tend to be farmed in much lower volumes. Pork and chicken, it's quite high turnover generationally. Mm-hmm. And people are very efficient at it. And the animals are tremendously efficient, or can be, forsaking when feed price is wrong and various other things. So there's been this push to kind of reduce the price, and partly by, I guess, the retailers, and partly farmers have wanted to try and do it cheaper and produce more of it. And I think it's kind of, that's been part of it. And then because the tasting, I believe, has been massively lost, then you can't command the same price point. I mean, if you look at the price of beef to the price of pork, beef is hugely expensive compared to pork. And it's not illogical to think if you could make the pork taste more like the beef, then surely you could get a price point somewhere in between.
Yeah, makes sense.
And, it would be better for all concerned. It'd be better for the consumer. It'd be better for everybody.
Yeah.
So that was your first question, wasn't it? Why is it the cheapest meat? I think because you've got, it can be done efficiently, particularly in factory farming scenarios. It can be done really efficiently.
Yeah.
And what was your second one?
It was about the marbling. Why has nobody really cared about it? But I guess you probably sort of answered it to some
I think it's not always something that's discussed. Firstly, it is less easy to see in pork than it is in beef. It's there, and if you look for it, you will see it. And particularly if something's heavily marbled pork, you will notice it. Okay. But if you walk into a supermarket, most of it's just, there's no marbling.
Got that loiny look,
Yeah. And that's because farmers for many years, they were concentrating on leanness. And leanness and marbling can have some form of interaction. But it was all about lean. It had to be a pale pink colour. It was driven by what the supermarkets, I guess, thought the consumer wanted. But if you look for marbling in pork, it is there. If you cure pork, if you darken that flesh in any way through some curing process, you'll see it a lot better. Whereas beef, it's probably inherently more visible.
Yeah.
Also, people, I think, in the beef world, it's more sophisticated. Everybody knows, right, go out for a meal. Do I want a ribeye? Do I want a sirloin? Should I have the Aberdeen Angus? Should I have the USDA Prime? It's a little bit more heading towards where the wine market
is.
No
one talks about like that with pig, do they?
Not really. Iberican guys do. And, that's how we want people to talk about our pork. But, when if you have the opportunity to sit down with chefs and you just say, right, we'll try a bit of this and try a bit of that, it's inherently obvious that one is a way better eating experience than the other. So I think, part of it's an education process, and God almighty, any of you listeners that are listening to me that have the unfortunate, if you ever do meet me, don't get me on marbling, I'll go on forever.
You must have eaten Mangalitsa pork.
Yes.
Did you rate it?
I like the concept. It's a woolly Hungarian pig. It's very, very fat. I think it works incredibly well.
Fatter than a normal pig.
Oh yeah, hugely fat. I think the kind of meat it produces works very well in a barbecue scenario where they're cooking low and slow over a long period of time.
Draws all that fat out.
Don't think it works very well in other scenarios.
No.
Because pigs can be too fat. the exterior fat. If it's
But they're
too
already
fat.
fatty, aren't they? Let's face
Yeah,
it. Yeah.
and it's consistency that with the best will in the world, all of us want consistency, and we're farmers. We're producing something for people to eat and experience.
Yeah.
So it's really important that we achieve as much consistency as you can with a natural product.
Yeah.
But with the Mangalitsa, it's so fat. So it has a market in certain markets. Not my thing.
No. I think one thing I mentioned to you before, sometimes, I can't remember what time of the year, but because I've never really looked into it too much, but sometimes if I've got some pork belly, which is one of my favourites, no matter how much you cook it, the fat has this weird, like, watery, springy texture, and I can never figure out why. And I didn't know if it was water retention or young fat or not enough.
It can be. I mean, we changed a component in our feeds many years ago now that improved the taste and texture of our fat. I can't even tell you what it was. Sometimes
it's a secret because you forgot.
It's a secret. It's a secret because I don't know myself.
That's the best.
It's that good a secret. When you start getting under the skin of the meat science thing, it's bloody interesting because we've just talked about genetics and how we're solving it. You've also got feed. You've also got massive climate having an effect. So the best pork is grown in the cooler months because the animal eats at its genetic potential. It's got a decent appetite. A decent appetite, cracks on. You get good growth. In summer, pigs don't like summer, so the hotter the country or the hotter the temperature, they don't like it. So appetite goes down, growth goes down. Also, the deposition of intramuscular fat goes down in summer.
Because pigs can't regulate their body heat.
They can't regulate the body heat, so no sweat glands. So they just don't like heat. And that's why really hot countries will not have pigs outdoors. It's detrimental. Affects fertility, all sorts of stuff.
Okay.
But, if you're looking at something like marbling and fat texture, that will be influenced by the weather somewhat. So if it's hot, then whatever animal is far less likely to lay down fat. And I believe fat, I think they lay it down in the stomach first, then on the outside of the meat, subcutaneous fat, and finally they lay it down as marbling. So, I know from our own experience that our marbling will go backwards during the summer months, depending on what stage the animal is when it hits summer, but it will go backwards and then it will lift forwards massively as you come out of summer into autumn. They'll just grow like hell. And it's just, I think it doesn't matter whether you're looking at fish in different water temperatures, but, it has an effect.
So, to take a sidestep here, we've spoken about the effort you go to, deep efforts to make the best protein and fat, keep the pigs happy, make them grow. Let's jump on to what the modern people are sort of happy for, and I'm a bit ambivalent about. I'm not anti it or pro it, but it's cell-based meats. Yeah, so that would do away with you guys because
it would.
They'd make it in a nice, apparently clean factory.
I think the hours would be better.
The hours probably would be better, and there'd be no slaughtering, and that's obviously for those guys a big pro. But obviously we don't know what makes the protein. We don't know what makes the fat. I'm guessing it's industrial components, I guess.
No, I think what I've been led to believe that they have to start off with live animal cells.
Yes, that's right. And then afterwards it's cultures and so
I believe so, but you never do away with some component of live animal in starting that process.
Yes. Okay. I think I read something about beef ages ago and it said we
start with a carrot.
Yeah, exactly. But they start off with say a death of one cow can provide enough cell-based meat for 3,000 cows maybe.
Possibly.
So obviously I guess some people like that obviously, and nobody likes death. So nobody does, but it's the way of life to some degree. So I guess you're not a fan of lab-grown meat. Are you intrigued or?
Well, I had a little bit to do with it. I've had one or two conversations with people involved in it. On one level, look, if somebody can produce what I'm producing in a lab without live animals, then is that a plus? Possibly. It's probably a big plus. Because, slaughtering an animal, if you could achieve exactly the same thing without doing it, probably morally, it's way better, isn't it? It kind of has to be. Can they achieve the same results? I don't necessarily believe they can, because I think when it comes to taste, it's different mussels that we eat, and different mussels taste differently because depending on what they do and how hard they work. So I think that will be very difficult to achieve. It is, what are they putting in there to achieve what they want? Is there any negatives around what's going in? And then I feel quite strongly that you have to have animals involved in the land, in terms of putting muck on the land, in terms of, that it is part of the life cycle of the land. If you didn't farm animals at all, you would have to use chemicals and other. So I think to kind of, I know we're talking about cell-based, but to kind of say, can we ever achieve not farming animals at all? It's going to be quite tricky to do that on many levels. And also, if you ask me personally, I see, I work with animals every day. I like animals. I enjoy being with animals. But I'm reasonably comfortable with the fact that there's a food chain and we're all in it. I don't really struggle with
No.
I don't want to eat animals that are improperly reared. I don't want to be stupid in my consumption of animals, but I don't personally have and maybe because I'm in farming, maybe we're a bit more used to it. I don't know. I don't struggle with, I enjoy eating pork and beef, and I totally get and respect and understand, probably more than a lot of people, that animal's lost its life to do that. So
Agreed.
I mustn't be flippant in the way that, I must eat it and respect that animal for what it's given me.
I think one of the, I get what vegans or pro-animal life, whatever they want to be called, I understand that point. I get where they're coming from. But I think, for me, one of the invalid arguments is that they're swapping out badly reared meat from their diet and, poor quality, whether it was, I don't know, very processed hot dogs, whatever, and then moving over to poorly farmed vegetable substitutes. And actually, the key thing that's missing is quality of everything. And I think if they paid a little bit more at the supermarket or the butchers for that better meat, they vote with their feet. And, it's real economics working. If they buy quality, then people rear more quality products and so on.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, it's quite straightforward. A farmer will produce whatever the market wants. Yeah. If somebody said to me, can you produce one pig in a field?
Yeah.
I'd be, but this is what
it's going to cost X.
It's going to cost X. And, I think that's good and that's healthy. And that's, I like the idea. And maybe if consumers understood farming a bit more, that would help. But I don't see... I get the vegan thing. I think it's great that people are saying, let's not eat meat. They're saying let's not eat meat. I like and get the idea of let's not eat it all the time, and developing alternatives or doing different recipes and stuff. But I'm not sure, for a lot of people, I think it's a difficult thing to not eat meat or not have dairy products. And as I said, I'm not uncomfortable with eating eggs or cheese I just think we need to be.
One thing I've always tried to get out there, and it's really difficult because people don't understand the concept, but I think in an ideal world, most vegans that are activists, that care about this, that get involved and, let's say, try and push legislation or force farmers or whatever it is, are quite active, let's say, sometimes negatively, they genuinely think that if you weren't killing animals, they would be roaming free and they'd be happy. However, I tend to think that wouldn't happen, and maybe I'm wrong, but
You're 100% right.
Yeah, like no one's going to carry on rearing animals if there's no profit to be made from them.
No.
You know, like, and I think, that's why in India you see just skinny cows just walking all over the place,
yeah.
and they're meant to be sacred.
Yeah.
And you think, well, if they're sacred and they're walking all over the place and they're skinny, well, they're not that sacred, are they? So,
no.
And I think that some people have this idyllic feeling that we'll give them back the land and you're going to see wild pigs. And
you could argue, I mean, at the moment you drive around places like Wales and Scotland, and because it's visible, it's in your face, you've got fields of grass, you've got cattle and sheep, you've got quite a picturesque view. Well, if those animals weren't there, all of those fields would revert to natural scrubland or woodland. The whole place would look different. Or they'd all be planted possibly with some plant. I just don't think it's gonna.
Yeah, I just think that like you said, it's the cycle of life that people have lost track of, and I do wonder if that's because for years people have had meat or whatever delivered in a plastic tray with plastic cling film over it, and whereas because I guess it's the lack of butchers. People get offended when they see meat hung in the window. Why? I think that should be put out there. I think people need to know about that.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately man is a hunter-gatherer. Yeah. That's where we sort of came from. And we're probably not that, we haven't come that far from that scenario, most of us. And it's hot. It's impossible to ignore that. And it's probably impossible to ignore that nutritionally for generations. That's what our bodies have thrived on. That's what they've got used to. It's very, the whole farming thing and the whole kind of ethics of it, it's a dilemma for a lot of people on all sides of the fence. It's not easy, it's how do we want the landscape looked? What do we want farmers to do? How far do we push the welfare thing? There's so many kind of like big debates in there.
Talking about welfare, and it doesn't obviously affect pig because of what it is, but halal slaughter. What's your thoughts on that?
I don't like it. Obviously doesn't apply to pig. No. I have seen it. Yeah. I've seen it done in the UK. I don't think it should be done in the UK. I don't like it. I find it. I think if you're going to have, you have a situation now in abattoirs where they are well monitored. It is of people's concern as to how can we do this process as quickly as possible. How can we do it with the minimum of stress? They're really big, reaching, searching questions for that industry. And I think when you allow, a very traditional, killing animals with a sword, I don't like it at all.
Yeah. Well.
So my view is, that. Again, it's no different to the imports. We should just be saying, look, if this is what society doesn't want, we're not going to have it. And we're not going to support it through imports.
I guess the thing
it's difficult. There's a load of religious sensibilities in there.
That's what makes it contentious, is because it's linked to a religion. Doesn't matter what religion, because obviously, actually, to be fair, kosher is no different, to be fair. So it's not just Muslim, it's kosher and Muslim. Yeah. So it's not just halal. But I think if there wasn't the religious element, it would just be a welfare issue. We don't agree with this, and let's not do it no more.
That's 100%.
Yeah.
But this is where it becomes very difficult, isn't it? And this is where, you have cultural problems and everything. But I don't know. I just sort of feel at some stage, if you're going to have a society or a country, and you want to bring stuff in, or that's what legislation says, then you've just got to, grow some balls and get on with it.
I do think so. Well, obviously, I think I mentioned to you earlier that in Belgium in 2019, they banned it, and it's still banned because they're taking it to court. I don't know who exactly, but some people are trying to take it to court to get it overturned. And it was weird because one of the arguments was, well, if you ban it, people will just do it at home. I'm thinking, what? You'll just get
with a cat?
I hope not. But we'd just get the lamb, I guess, and just slaughter it at home. And I think
Probably.
yeah, but again, that shouldn't.
But it's not easy to do that, is it? To go get a lamb.
I don't know, mate. I don't know. Some people.
I mean, I've got friends who farm in Australia, and if you're in the outback, and they want to eat a lamb, that's what they'll do. They'll go and get one, and you wouldn't dream of doing it here. It wouldn't even cross your mind. You wouldn't want to do it, but sometimes it's
just where you are,
just where you are, and the cultural and yeah.
So the important thing that people miss as well, it's not just the animal and the death, but it's also the life and what it puts back to the field. And ecology is really important. Do you think that government should probably get farmers to do a bit more of this, whether it's ecology boosting or, you guys have took it upon yourselves to improve bee numbers? It could be anything. It could be butterflies or whatever. If someone had something that was a passion, should they be paid by the government to say, go ahead and do it, go for it?
I think not.
Okay. Which bit, the paying bit, or?
I don't think it's government.
Oh, okay.
I kind of get where the government's at, but I kind of think if we want to improve nature in whatever form it takes, then I think it has to be society's problem collectively. And I think that we as farmers can do this sort of stuff and not at huge expense. Okay, we can do it not at huge expense. But it is up to us and our markets to pay us, not necessarily the government. It needs to be market-led. I'll explain that a little bit easier. Obviously, what we do is on a grand scale, we're growing. We've kind of our philosophy is we are responsible for around our farm 3 different areas of land, one of which is the pig site. And in and around what we do, there is an ecosystem. Nature is going on. And we want to be sustainable, but we've got no roofs apart from pig huts to put solar panels on, etc. So our view of sustainability is if we can increase the number and diversity of species in and around our environment that we commercially farm, then we are doing something positive for nature. So it's a very, very, very simple scenario. And you walk around the farm and, it's full of wildlife full of pollinators. And you get pollinators, more insects, more birds, more small mammals, more predators. That's your life. That's your ecosystem from the bottom up. So you start by growing plants. So it's now become quite a big part of what we do. So we're proud to talk to people about it. We're proud to show them it. And the people that buy from us, that they like that aspect. They're often a lot younger than I am. They are often concerned about the world, and they see the link between how their food is grown or produced and its effect and potential positive effect on nature and the environment. So I think this is what we as food manufacturers and brands and farmers, we need to be doing. We need to be making it very clear to people that for a long period of time, it's all been about animal welfare. And yes, how you purchase your meat directly affects the welfare of those animals. So if you can support better welfare farms, that's good. The next level of this is to understand the negative aspect of our food production and what it does to nature or the environment, and the positive nature of it. And if you allow that to become a massive commercial theme, you cannot go anywhere and not have fair trade coffee now. So somewhere along the line, one presumes the coffee grower is getting a little bit more than if it wasn't fair trade. This is no different. What needs to happen is there needs to be more and more brands need to see a marketing advantage, a commercial advantage, albeit maybe just marketing or maybe a tiny bit more money. They need to realise that if they can make that link between the final product and positive effects on the environment, you've got a whole swathe of society. If it's a nominal cost, then people are going to pay it, and it will be that whole peer pressure thing. It will be that whole, you cannot have a brand that is destructive to nature.
So one analogy you gave me last time I was with you was, for argument's sake, Warburton's or Hovis.
Yeah.
And then they use a lot of wheat. And
Yeah.
if they said to the wheat farmer,
Yeah.
grower,
Yeah.
long day. If they said to the grower, save a portion or the outskirts, create borders, whatever, and we want to push, I don't know, bumblebees or butterflies, whatever it may be, then they could go market it and say, did you know that we do X?
Yeah.
We force X, you know, and this does so much good because of blah, 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 blah.
Yeah.
X, Y, Z. Really nice, quick message, and the consumer buys their bread because the bread next to them was all right.
Yeah.
And it's nice, but doesn't do those things.
Yeah.
Allegedly. It's still wheat.
That's 100% how I see something like this working. You've got to make sure you can either the government legislates and either tells farmers, well, you've just got to do it. It's your problem. You've got the land. You've got to look after the environment. That ain't going to work. Or government has got to go and do grants, etc., etc. But, you know, they'll be prescriptive. So they'll be saying to every farmer in the land, that's what you've got to do. Whereas if you allow the market to see benefit, it has done with coffee, it has done with this tuna wasn't caught using dolphin nets. There's multiple examples of it in retail.
So it's allowing the free market economy.
I believe it will work better from my position of knowledge of kind of farmer, retail, food service. I think you have to have a scenario where the end consumer sees benefit. I mean, we work with a business, a very well-known business, top of their game, that produces ready-made meals, and they are seriously looking at this across their supply base because they want to be able to come out and say, you know, we as a manufacturing company, this is part of our philosophy, and look what we're working on with our suppliers. So they're effectively saying, I guess, look, you know, what can you do at supply level, in raw material, farming level? What can you do to improve nature? What can you do to improve the soil type? And, you know, they're going to be, well, we can do anything you want, provided there's a bit more money coming through. And if you put the right money through, you get it done properly, don't you? Yeah. If you try and sort of pay peanuts, it's not going to happen. So I believe you're going to see this happening in more and more brands, and then it will become self-fulfilling. And why not? Because, you know, people are confused about food. And, you know, it's like the vegan movement, you know, you have the same problem. You know, you could be growing a crop in a field of, you know, whatever kind of nut people are eating. But, you know, if there's no space for nature, I mean, it doesn't mean just because it's that and it's going to be consumed by those people, doesn't mean it's good for nature, doesn't mean it's good for the environment. So I think this is a really important theme. And why not? If we want to shape the way our world looks, and, you know, we want to support the decimation of the species, this is the way to do it.
How many bumblebees are we up to now on your farms?
God. At the moment, my brother thought it's early March. He's seen some queens out. I haven't seen a queen bumblebee out yet. But we've been doing our bumblebee project for about 7 years. We plant, in simple terms, about 80 football fields worth of cover containing flowers. It's quite big, or very big. And we try and count the bumblebees. And obviously we're not stupid. We'll go and count them on the day when on a very hot day, which is a lot about. And we'll do it at the height of their season, which is generally around first 2 or 3 weeks of June.
Okay.
We achieved over 1 million bumblebees. That's different to honeybees. Yeah. Honeybees, you know, God knows how many of them. So, you know, pretty colossal numbers.
Why did you choose the bumblebee? Why is that important?
Well, we wanted to do we, as I said earlier, we wanted to, and my brother was the real, the one that really got his head around it first, and between us we developed it, but he was the one that really, did the majority of the sort of thought process on it, and it went on for a long time. Went on for 2 or 3 years, and it was how can we support nature? What can we do for the planet as farmers? We're responsible for this land. And so it became about, as I explained earlier, it came about that whole ecosystem. And bumblebees, everybody knows the bumblebees in decline. It's a beautiful, interesting lifestyle, beautiful creature. And we took it as our signature creature. So, we're measuring the bumblebees, numbers, species, but everything else will be thriving alongside it. But yeah, we're fascinated by bumblebees. They resonate with people. It is a well-known fact that 97% of wildflower meadows have disappeared in the UK since the Second World War. There's an issue with the lack of bees around the world. There's hand pollination in India. It's hand pollination in China. Places like Australia and America, when it comes to almond harvests and various bits and pieces, they're bringing in hives with honeybees to pollinate, and 2 out of 3 every mouthfuls of food we eat requires pollination. So, pollinators are hugely, hugely important. Modern farming practices are not conducive to building the numbers up. The countryside's a vast space, so somehow or other we need farmers to build up the number of species. It's what you research it. They'll tell you read survey after survey. There was one I think last year, 50% less insects in Germany or 70% less insects, and it's happening everywhere. Yeah. So at some stage we've got to make space for this. Yeah. And the logical place to do it, where you can vast space, is agriculture, even if it's a small percentage of it. And I think the only way you're going to do it is you make it a big thing for consumers. Yeah. You make it a small surcharging price point. Yeah. Because it doesn't need to be big. You
wouldn't be more than a penny on a loaf of bread, would it?
Oh God, probably not even that. No. I don't know what the figures would be, but it would be absolutely negligible. Yeah. And if you do it that way, you're going to give brands credence. The environment is the big. What can we do? What can we do? Mm.
Well, if everyone does what they can do,
yes,
then that's a good thing, isn't it?
Absolutely. Yeah. That's what I meant. We could pay more attention to how our food was produced in a positive way. Yeah. And I just that's the way I see this thing going.
Yeah, I agree. Well, what I'd like to finish this with, because we're at the 2-hour mark, is tell us how.
If anyone's got this far, well done.
The good thing is it's all industry people. So, but one thing I want to know is, finish us off with, how did Gordon Brown end up on your farm all those years ago?
Oh, it's lovely, to be honest. Big life lesson for me. I read a newspaper article, and I can't remember what newspaper it was, and basically some bloke somewhere, when Gordon Brown was Prime Minister, wrote him a letter telling him, your policy on this is crap, or whatever it was. Anyway, Gordon Brown had rung the bloke up at 5:30 in the morning to say, "I've got your letter and I disagree with you." And the bloke who'd sent the letter was really pissed off about being phoned at 5:30 in the morning by the Prime Minister. And I read the article and I thought, that's really interesting. I thought, obviously, if you send something to Number 10, there is a remote chance that the boss will read it. Whereas I would have just assumed, it doesn't get anywhere near the bloke. And I suspect most of it doesn't, to be fair. Anyway, some time later, not long after, I read an article that Gordon Brown was coming down to Suffolk on holiday with his children, and he was going to spend, 5 days in Suffolk. And I wrote to Number 10 and just said, look, if you want to come have an afternoon on a farm, we would be delighted to show you around. Here's our website. We do this with people. There'll be no press here. There'll be nothing. And we'd just be delighted to show you around. So we actually ended up having this amazing opportunity of showing the Prime Minister and his wife round, and his children, for an afternoon in a really informal manner. laughing, joking, lovely bloke, and undoubtedly one of the highlights of my life. Being able to meet a prime minister. It's never going to happen to me again. I doubt.
One, which is already great odds.
Well, but I think it was a wonderful experience. It was really interesting, and he was the complete opposite of how I imagined him to be. But it demonstrated to me 100%. If you don't ask, you don't get.
Yeah. I do wonder if he's one of those prime ministers that I probably wasn't overly into politics back then anyway, but I wonder if he's a prime minister that people will look back on and think probably wasn't so bad. He tried his best.
Possibly.
Yeah.
I do like to follow politics and stuff, but it was never about politics that afternoon.
No, it was about farming.
It was about just having a nice afternoon and meeting a prime minister and just normal. It was lovely, really was.
Did you get any grief from any farmer friends?
Yes. Yeah, our landlady, at the time, was like, we obviously rented the land off her, and she's out and out, conservative, and she was really annoyed that we'd had him on the land, and you just think, rein it in.
I think even if I was off the opposite persuasion, I think I'd still be quite happy to be.
Well, it didn't matter, yeah. I just think, it's great, that you can. For me, it was just amazing because you think, I can touch base with someone like that and they can respond.
And also,
if the circumstances
if you manage to walk away with a different opinion and respect for farming, just because casually he was around you and understood certain things that he probably would have never understood.
Probably put him off farmers. He probably thought they all like this one.
The answer is yes, for the most part. But to be fair, if you can influence somebody, and I don't mean in the negative lobbying way, I mean in just a very neutral way. His kids are on the farm, they're running around, he's understanding basic things,
Yeah.
That could never be a bad thing.
No, it's a good thing. It's a good thing.
Yeah. Well, on that note.
Well, thank you very much, Stelios.
No, thank you for coming on, and I hope you have a great day.
And you. Thank you.
Massive thank you to Mark Hayward for coming on the Ceres podcast. He gave up a lot of his time, showed me around the farms. It's great just to see the effort that's going into some great British product. To find out more about Dingley Dell Pork, you just go for the links in our show notes. They're all there, either on the website or on the app that you listen to. Be sure to share this podcast with your friends on social media. If you like this episode, chances are they will too. And remember, the first 3 people to get in touch will get their Dingley Dell cured meat gift from us and them. Have a great one.